This is Do It for a Living, your source for inside information on the future of automotive performance.
Welcome back. This is going to be an interesting podcast. This is the first time we've tried doing this. We had the idea of doing roundtable discussions, and we have a pretty good concept going on right now among shop owners as far as how do you validate your shop and your skills as a tuner or an engine builder, and is there any way we can certify that and offer some kind of validation for those skills instead of just anybody who reads a web page thinks they're a professional tuner? And so for this roundtable, we have Ben Strader with EFI University. How you doing, Ben?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
And we've also got Todd with My Shop Assist. How you doing, Todd?
Hey, Kevin. I'm doing good.
So we're going to kind of take this from three different perspectives. So myself, I'm going to kind of act as a shop owner. Ben obviously is the instructor and has the school for tuning. And Todd is going to act as kind of the consumer because most of what he does with car stuff is, bringing it to shops to have them work on the car. So let's go ahead and get this thing started, guys. First of all, is there a problem? Do shops need standards? Do we see a lot of issues with people just jumping in and working on other people's cars that's really not qualified to do the work?
Well, I think so. I've been sort of saying this for the better part of a decade that there is a problem. I mean, in every professional service-based industry, whether it's doctors or lawyers or school teachers or engineers, there's a governing body that sets at least a minimum standard by which somebody can say, I'm in business as a professional. So obviously, meeting the minimum standard doesn't mean that somebody's really the greatest or the best or whatever, but at least it demonstrates that they've put forth some effort. And, the internet has really changed our environment in a lot of ways because information is so readily available that it's easy for people to get, frankly, a lot of what they need to be successful in this business and as a career, but it doesn't really demonstrate that they have any competency to do it. And I think that's a real problem. What about you, Todd? You're the consumer side. What have you seen?
From a consumer side, let's say you buy a car and you want to get it worked on, obviously the internet is where you're going to go to ask people their experiences, but there's no governing body that says this shop is legitimate. Usually you can find out, shady shops, but we've noticed over the years of being involved with businesses that, they come and go and they take advantage of a lot of people. The bad ones do. And the good ones, have to stay back and clean up the mess that happens a lot. And
we see that a lot in this industry where the person with the best marketing gets the benefit of the best messaging, even if it's not necessarily an accurate description of what they do or who they are. And so finding a shop just because they have a nice looking facility or a nice,
For a lot of people, the first thing they see is the web page. And, I'm terrible at making web pages. My home pages, I spent a day doing it, and I have been working on it for about 2 weeks now and haven't touched it since the day I started working on it. So it's got unfinished work. But there are people with really pretty web pages that may look really authentic, but when you get to the shop, it's a totally different thing.
Well, and think about how tempting that is for a business owner. So, Kevin, you just put it perfectly. You have that, obviously we all know each other, but you have that personality that you could probably do anything from, tie your shoes to building a space shuttle. So you tend to want to do everything yourself. But if I was to say, hey, I'll tell you what, if you spent $15,000 and you had this professional marketing guy build your website, and over the next 2 years, it's going to bring you $200,000, would you do it? Of course. Uh-huh. And so a lot of these first-time shop owners are very tempted to pay for good design, good creative content, have an excellent website, and they end up, and I hate to put it this way, but they end up hurting the industry because of their lack of skill and experience. They end up using all of these customers that they get. They're taking away from really knowledgeable, experienced guys that maybe don't have the polished website, and then they end up using that customer as their guinea pig as they learn, and maybe the project doesn't turn out the way the customer wanted, and eventually they end up finding a guy like you who can do it properly, but it took them a long time to find you, and that's unhealthy for our industry.
And so do consumers benefit by having certified shops? The good example is obviously going to be a dealership. You buy a new Mercedes, you bring it to the Mercedes dealership. Not just anybody is authorized to work on that car, although anybody can work on it, right?
Yeah, I think if you look at it from a consumer standpoint, the idea of having something certified is a way of guaranteeing that person's ability to do what they say they can do. And so when you call, your AC repairman, they're all going to be certified in whatever body that, looks over them. And they have gone through a training program and they have apprenticed and they have put blood, sweat, and money into trying to learn that trade, and they at least have done something to show that they are competent in that field. Like, you call your AC repairman, and you don't expect some kid who just owns an AC to come and work on it. But you can see that a lot in a shop where you have to a shop owner has to get started somewhere, and currently the system just means you get started by opening your doors. Like, that's the requirement. You can have a small toolbox and you can just open your doors, and like, you don't even have to have a lift. You can just start working on cars. And the fear for a consumer is that they may not be running a legitimate business where they're at, and they may, in the best case, just skirt, like cut corners or not do a good enough work. And in the worst case, they can ruin your car. So yeah, like, consumers being able to have some backing that, hey, like, this body says that this shop is legitimate. And you see that with repair shops with the ASE certification. So, the mechanics there, shops are proud to say our mechanics are ASE certified. But for a performance shop, that doesn't really, to me, that doesn't really apply, because I'm not taking my car there to get the AC repaired. I'm taking it there to have somebody literally go into how it operates and modify base code and really, change the car completely. And yeah, there's nothing out there. So I feel like it would benefit consumers to be able to see, hey, this shop, really has put some effort into becoming legitimate. And, like, it goes a long way having somebody stand behind that shop and say, hey, these guys are good and can do what they say they do.
Well, I think there's a good kind of segue there, in that what we're talking about is not trying to eliminate the grassroots enthusiast from tinkering and toying. That's what our industry is built on, right? Guys that are passionate, they just want to mess around. But what we're talking about are the guys who say, I like this so much that I want to go into business and have people give me their money and give me access to their what may be $100,000 or more project. And so when you say, would the consumer benefit from having shops that are certified, I think the argument's just as simple as saying, well, do patients benefit from having board certified physicians? Or do you just go, well, that's a bunch of hocus pocus. I'm just going to go to this guy that, he's in medical school. How bad could it be? So, I think you end up with the same thing. I think it's a fine line where I don't want to be have our noses in the air and say, well, if you're not a certified shop, then, you shouldn't even be talking to us in our industry, because it's not like that. Obviously, I have a biased opinion, being a training, school, academy, whatever you want to call it, where we do our best to fix that problem of lack of skill and education. But I also don't think that in an industry that's as much enthusiast driven as ours, that we have to make it you're either in or you're out. All we're saying is that if you want to be a professional, i.e. get paid, there should be some level of standardization, and that's mainly for the consumer much more than the shop.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's, exactly what you're saying, Ben. I don't think anybody's saying that we're going to make it impossible for you to work on people's cars. Anybody can still open a shop. It just,
Absolutely.
If you want to be a certified shop, that brings with it some sort of aura of professionalism, which I think is at this point in time, I feel like it's much needed. So a professional shop is going to be a better place to go than somebody who's just doing it out of their garage. So
right, and at the end of the day, the consumers, they're always going to have a choice. What we want to do is add value to the shops that are willing to go through that effort and make the choice for the consumers easier and more comfortable, and give them more confidence.
Yeah. And so there was also another conversation going on with the insurance for race shops. Is getting much, much harder to do. And I think insurance actually kind of dictates a lot of what shops can and cannot do, interestingly enough, especially after hearing this kind of conversation I've started to involve myself with. But shops need to have, and I did not even know this literally until a week ago, that a performance shop needs to be on the policy for the manufacturers of parts they sell. That's how insurance companies want to do it. And as weird as that sounds, that means the insurance company is saying, if you want me to insure you, I want to make sure the stuff you're putting on cars is also insured. And that kind of like starts setting some standards that shops need to kind of follow through with. Like, you just can't sell anything you want because you're liable for that stuff. If you're selling stuff that you're insured to install, then the people who make it are liable for it. And so that kind of gets into like starting to set a standard for, I guess, a performance shop or a tuner, or, like if you're using a Motec ECU to tune a car, obviously Motec is going to want to have you as a certified tuner, not just some Joe Blow who's bought a Motec and wants to figure it out, right?
That is a concept that I'm quite familiar with. Very similar to the aviation industry. Some years back when I was a corporate pilot, there's the regulatory requirements that the government sets for a particular pilot and his training and skill levels to fly a given aircraft. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, whether or not that person can do that is really dictated by the insurance companies. They want to know, how current are you and how many times have you flown in the last, 60 days, 90 days, the last year. They're much more interested in the statistical analysis of the number of hours pilots fly and so on and so forth, much less than, well, the government said that on one day, under one set of circumstances, you demonstrated proficiency to do this. If we have to be underwriting this liability, then we want to make sure that you're extremely current. So there's a completely different set of standards, which is what we're really talking about, that dictates whether a professional pilot can actually operate as a professional pilot, regardless of what the regulatory requirements might be. And that's a similar thing that is probably taking shape at the ground level now in our industry, where the insurance company is like, well, that's great that you're a shop and that you are approved by XYZ company to sell their mufflers. But we want to know where the liability exists if somebody car catches on fire or crashes or whatever. So I think that's really going to separate a lot of the industry in terms of, well, are you doing full-blown race-only vehicles, or are you doing, modifications to street cars? And, that's a challenge that I think is really going to be difficult as we move forward, as much as both the government on the regulatory, EPA side, and the manufacturers are making it increasingly difficult to modify these OEM vehicles. I think that's a real challenge moving forward if we're going to talk about standardizing, especially on things like liability and insurance underwriting and things like that.
Yeah, and one thing from like a consumer side, like if part of the requirement of being let's say a certified shop was that you had the necessary insurance to operate your business, because I think I'm worried that a lot of consumers don't realize that shop insurance is not, it's not really, I don't think it's the law to have insurance. You can operate your business at a risk that you want, and having insurance just mitigates that risk. And so, maybe one of these requirements for having a shop is you have to prove that you actually do have insurance to cover anything bad, like fire or damage to the vehicle or theft. Theft is probably the most common one. So that the consumer has some assurances that their car or their vehicle or whatever is going to be taken care of when it's at your quote unquote maybe certified shop. So I think that would be pretty cool to kind of work all that together, and it kind of is a big circle of getting people on the list of insurers and getting people actual insurance that they can afford and that works for their shop. It's a hard undertaking that we're finding more and more as we dive into it. What it takes to actually be certified, what it takes to actually get insurance as a shop.
So Ben, with the tuning part of this, say you could be an authorized tuner or a certified tuner. Do you find that in the classes that you teach, is it really, I don't know how else to say this, like hard for people? I mean, is it just taking the class and understanding it, or do you also have to have some kind of, niche market sort of expertise? So like if you tune a Motec, you can tune a Motec on any car, but if you're tuning a factory ECU, like I would not even know where to start with a Mercedes, right? So I can tune a Mitsubishi, but not a Mercedes. Does that make me a certifiable tuner or not? How do you kind of like, how would you even sort this out?
So I think that's a great question. That's something that we've wrestled with for years and years. I mean, we've been doing our in-house certification process for more than 10 years now. And again, like for me, the struggle is we're a for-profit business, which means we really want people to come and take our training and get value out of it and go tell other people that it was money well spent. And what you struggle with is you have to make it so that people can't just come and buy this certification. And so one of the things that we've always prided ourselves on is we worked really hard to try to set what we thought would be a great minimum set of skills and abilities to demonstrate proficiency. And we bounced ideas off of the various aftermarket ECU manufacturers and so on and so forth. And admittedly, our school, EFI University in particular, has traditionally focused on racing and motorsports vehicles, not street cars. And so there are maybe those that argue that our curriculum doesn't address some of those issues. But I sort of beg to differ in the sense that tuning, the example you brought up of I know how to tune an Evo, but not necessarily a Mitsubishi. And I think to clarify your statement, what you really mean to say there is you know how to manipulate the software that communicates with Evos, but not necessarily with a Mercedes. My argument is that both of them are engines and require the same care and thought and expertise in terms of why does it need a particular fuel mixture and why would it need ignition timing or boost or traction control. Those fundamental theories and practices that we do in tuning an engine are independent of engine or manufacturer type. And so I feel that what we did at EFI University was try to set a minimum knowledge base and a minimum skill set so that people understand how to correctly test and collect data and make informed decisions about engine tuning. And we've kind of decided that because of the complexities and the variety of tools that you might use, software is out there, to not kind of try to get into every single market and go, well, we got to help the Fiat guys, and we got to go over here and help the Viper guys, and then we got to help the Chrysler guys. And then what happens is you end up spending all this time trying to learn how to use a particular brand of software. I'll give you a perfect example. We get this all the time. Guys will come in and go, I want to talk about Corvettes or Camaros. And I go, okay, here's some examples. We have a relationship with a company in Australia called EFI Live. And they go, oh, yeah, I've heard of them. That's great. So what number do I put in it if I'm using HP tuners? And I'm like, okay, you're asking me a software question, not a how to tune an engine properly question. And so we've sort of walked that fence a little delicately because it's so intense. And frankly, every make, model, year, everything changes. And so unless you're in the trenches every day doing Mercedes software or BMW or whatever, you're really not going to be the expert in that brand. And so I really, truly believe that what's more important is the fundamental skills of how to make a vehicle work properly. And that's what we focus on teaching here. And that's what our standards is based on, not necessarily how well you know the '07 model year Corvette.
Okay, so and that actually takes on, I think, a lot of what, like the ASE certification. So you go to UTI, which is also a for-profit school, and they teach you the material and the theory to take the ASE certification testing. So I think you're exactly on point with what you're doing with tuning. That's how they do it with the mechanical aspect of it too. So they're taking a test, and they may not know how to work specifically on like a Fiat, but they know how to work on a 4-cylinder engine because that's the class taught them. Right. So so that's you're doing basically the same thing, just on a tuning perspective.
And I think that if you look at UTI's model, they do exactly the same thing. And then what they do is they go, look, if you want to go work for BMW, for example, we've partnered with BMW in their what they call the STEP program to train after you've done the basic, understanding and you have this fundamental skills and abilities. Now we're going to have a program that specifically focuses on BMWs or Ford or Caterpillar or whatever. But those are really fueled and driven by the OEM manufacturers themselves, not necessarily UTI. They've just said, look, we have a facility and we can be the facilitator to deliver the materials that you've developed. And so we've taken that same approach at EFI University and said, hey, we're going to partner with companies like Motec and EFI Live and Haltech and XYZ brands that have come forth and said, boy, we recognize that a lot of people know how engines work, but we need them to know how our brand of software works. So if you look over the last 10 years or so, we've been involved with Fast XFI and AEM and Haltech and just if you run the gamut of EFI manufacturers, most of them have had a positive experience in dealing with EFI University in that we've helped them provide that path to train their customers on the more specific models of ECUs. And so without manufacturer input, though, that just would not be possible because the software packages change so much all the time. So I think a well-rounded individual probably needs a little bit of both. Maybe you're just like you have your normal ASE certification, and then they have different levels. This guy's also a transmission guy. This guy's certified in brakes. This guy's, and then he gets all of his patches and he's a master certified. But it may be that you need some kind of general industry certification and then manufacturer specific.
Yeah, so that was kind of where I was running with it, Ben. Like, do you see maybe a value in offering aftermarket ECU specific training to shops so they can say, I am a certified Motec tuner? Because I know Motec does offer that from their headquarters, but I don't think I have not heard that any of the other manufacturers actually offer a legitimate training program on their tuning software. So are you seeing maybe a need or a desire to educate people on a specific ECU, an aftermarket ECU, after they've already learned fundamentals?
We see that all the time in part of our business model. I mean, I'm sitting here in front of my dyno and I'm looking around me and I've got 4 or 5 different engines combinations, and then only a month ago, myself and some of our sales staff and one of our instructors, we were down in Texas visiting with Cobb at their facility, talking about how do we better educate Cobb customers. We've worked with, all these companies. They recognize that need too. The real challenge for us at EFI University is no different than the challenge the shop owner has, in that how do we maintain our level of expertise when the technology is changing so quickly, not only at the software level, but at the features and functionality and the vehicles we're working on. When you're talking about these companies like EFI Live, AHP Tuners, Cobb, that are having the new model year Volkswagen Golf just came out, so now we have to find out what's in there and then make software for that, and then it's a little different than the way we've done it before, so now we have to make a new training program. And so for us, we can only deliver those trainings if we have a direct link with the manufacturer to get that information, because frankly, we have, 6 or 8 different engines and several cars and half a dozen different brands of ECUs, and it's impossible for us to spend every day solving the common problems that might show up in a shop with brand X software. So we have to rely on the manufacturers to supply us with enough experience, education, and training that we can pass on to the consumer, because the manufacturers just don't have the resources to do it. They're not set up to be training facilities. They're set up to be manufacturers. And so we've had really good luck partnering with them, but it is an ongoing challenge that requires a lot of effort on both their part and our part to be able to do that. But I do think, to answer your question directly, there will always be a need for manufacturer-specific training.
Okay.
And Ben, you mentioned briefly, so when you were setting the standard for your theory class, I guess so it's EFI 101 or maybe even the 102, the advanced class?
Yeah, really both.
How did you come up with those standards? Like, were you talking to other industry professionals, or was there like obviously you're making this from scratch. Like, there's nothing for it.
Yeah,
and that's
I did.
The difficulty is.
It was really tough. Yeah, I've told this story a few times publicly. In fact, I think I might have mentioned a little bit about the very first time I was on this podcast, and now I'm a three-peater for you guys, which is pretty cool, by the way. But when we started thinking about this is about 2003 or 2004, when the concept of, wow, we got to do something. The first place I went to at that time, I was living in California, so I went to the California Board of Post-Secondary Education and made some phone calls, and nobody wanted to talk to us. It's not traditional academia. It doesn't fit into their model. They didn't want anything to do with us. And so we searched online for some of the more federal kind of regulatory boards. We talked to some local community colleges. Nobody really had an answer for us until I stumbled across the story of how SEMA and SFI came to be. And it was basically that same thing, where there was a bunch of guys standing around going, we got to do something about this. Let's get the government to make a policy. Nobody wanted to talk to them because they were racers and there was too niche market and it wasn't, mainstream. So they got together and said, well, what do we want? What are the, what's the minimum we'll accept? And they, made an agreement and did it. So I kind of took that same approach and traveled around the world. Actually, back then, I went to Australia and I visited with Motec and talked to them about their struggles and with their, users and consumers in Haltech. and Autronic. And then here in the States, I went to Michigan and I visited with, Fast XFI, and, I've talked to Holly over the years. And then I went to, the US Motec offices. And then I visited shops and said, what are you guys struggling with? And then I'd go to racetracks and hear stories from consumers. And, so I tried to get as much fair and honest input from the industry instead of saying, my goal was always, I never wanted to make EFI University the quote, Ben Strader School of Engine Tuning. I didn't want it to be a celebrity thing where people come to our school because, wow, I'll get to learn to tune from this famous guy that everybody knows that thinks he's really great. Because the problem is I can't grow the institution that way because I can never have any other instructors because they'd go, well, then you're not Ben. I don't want to go to your class. So I always wanted to make it about the institution of EFI University and make those standards relevant to more than just what I thought was interesting or important. And so that's how we originally came up with it, and literally said, well, if you look at how SEMA did it, and you look at how the ASE patch program works, and you got to get so much classroom training and so much field experience, and then you have to pass a written exam and demonstrate proficiency. I didn't invent any of that. I just basically copied what the template that was already there for the industry and made my best effort at adapting it to the tuning community.
So Todd, do you think there's like a way we can build these standards for not just engine tuning, but also like engine building and as a shop in general, or performance tech? I feel like SAM, School of Automotive Machines, may even have a lot of those qualifications for an engine builder, I would think. What about like the shops in general?
Yeah, so I think, for the shops in general, it's kind of a lot harder to narrow down what the curriculum's going to be. I don't know if it's harder than narrowing down what it is for tuning or engine building, but every shop is different and every shop is run a little differently, and that's, perfectly fine. And I think maybe some of the, something you could have as thrown out there for ideas to become a certified shop may be like, okay, you have to have insurance. You have to have some sort of insurance at your shop, and you have to have some way of tracking, some good way of tracking the work that you're doing to the cars. And you have to demonstrate a way of, updating the customers about, either the progress or issues. And you have to have, maybe like a dyno waiver, to say like, hey, this is a legitimate waiver here, here's some deals. And, maybe it goes as far as saying, hey, you need to have, some sort of organizational chart at your shop of who is responsible for what, in case conflicts come up. And so,
really almost like an accreditation process where you're going through and making sure that the shop has real brick and mortar and they have standardized procedures. And, it's a daunting task to think about how you could organize that and then who polices it and how you enforce or anything like that. And but so, I do think that it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah. And some of the things that are happening right now in the industry to push in that direction is that, manufacturers and wholesalers with their certified resellers. And so, we've seen some of this with the wholesalers where you have to actually get certified by whatever manufacturer happens to be the one in question that you are a legitimate installation shop. And that usually just means showing them, giving them your address and showing them a picture of your facility. But it's at least a step in the right direction because those manufacturers have seen issues with pop-up e-retailers or internet retailers, not offering the level of customer service that manufacturer desires. And this certification process may be an automatic okay for checking that box off for manufacturers. And so the discussion of insurance came up earlier. And if you are part of said certification and you have an okay from these manufacturers to install their parts, that may be enough that the insurance may automatically, or you may be included in the group plan or whatever they call it, to be covered to install those parts. Because it's just a really weird thing that Kevin mentioned earlier and that we're finding is that, insurance companies are now looking for specific requirements to get covered on certain parts. And Kevin, do you remember what was the example that was given?
Yeah, he gave me an example of and I'll be interviewing him in about a month from now, so we got it scheduled, but he's a busy guy. But he gave me an example of an engine that a customer had installed at a shop. So then the shop installed a turbo kit on this car, and the turbo went bad, and it ate up the engine. And the customer sued the shop for $65,000, I think is what he said. And so that is a case of, like the shop was liable because he was not on the turbo manufacturer's insurance. And the insurance company said, had he been on that policy, all of the liability would have gone to the turbo manufacturer's insurance. And so that's what the insurance companies are now looking for in this performance stuff. They're a path of liability. So, like if insurance company A is insuring the shop, but insurance company B is insuring the part that was made that was the defective part, insurance A is going to make insurance B pay for it. And that's what they're looking for. And
I think they call that subrogation, right? We're always looking for the next guy to shut it off.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so they said that he said it's not every single product you sell. He said there were 5 key areas. So like a good example that he gave me was like lift kits on trucks. There's a high a risk in that, like rolling over damage, hurting people sort of thing. Engines and brakes, I think he said, is a big one, and wheels and tires are also a big one. So he had, and I'm sure he'll be able to clarify that for us, he had a very specific list of things that were that they wanted to see the shops insured on those manufacturers' policies.
Yeah. And Kevin, did he talk at all about whether there was any pushback from the manufacturers when a shop calls up and says, hey, I'd like you to add me as additionally insured on your policy? And they're like, yeah, no, thanks. We'll find somebody else to sell to.
I didn't ask him that, but that's a good question that I will ask him. Obviously.
Yeah, but I'm excited for that interview. So make sure you get that kind of stuff in. He's going to be a good one.
Okay. Yeah. He did specify that he made it sound like it's very common. And he said it was extremely common from the wholesaler to manufacturer side. So I think he did say that just about everybody, like Jags, Summit, those kind of big guys, are on every single manufacturer that they sells policy. And it makes a little more sense looking at it from that because they're big companies and can handle it. But when you're pushing it down to the individual shop where it may be 3 people working there, how easy is it for us to make sure we're on 1,000 different part line insurance policies? I don't have an insurance guy to deal it for me.
Yeah, and I can see the argument already from the manufacturer going, well, a turbocharger is a delicate thing, and now I got to insure this guy, and I don't know him from Adam, and so he's not a certified shop. How do I know he's going to install it correctly? Mm-hmm. And now we're going to have this big insurance battle over it when it doesn't go well. And so I think you're sort of almost segueing into why, the certification thing, to my way of thinking, is every successful story in our industry starts with a relationship. So I have a relationship with my customers. I have a relationship with the manufacturers that trust me to give their training to their customers. And so manufacturers have a relationship with their dealers and distributors because they trust them to do the job correctly. And so having that extra badge of honor, like a shop that's been certified and has demonstrated proficiency, feeds into that relationship building process. When you go, hi, I'm Ben from Ben's Muffler Emporium, and I'd like to start selling your product. And they're like, well, we've never heard of you. What can you tell us about yourself? And you go, well, I've been certified under this, this, and this. It just makes that conversation a lot easier to have than, well, I just opened my shop and I really want to do some cool stuff.
Right. How much is your buy-in? I have a bank loan for $10,000, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, I've had a lot of conversations with ECU manufacturers of why that whole buy-in and volume-based commodity thing is a broken system for our industry, the tuning industry specifically, because it propagates that issue where you have these shops that a guy started and he has a bunch of money, so he has an initial large buy-in. Then the product sits on the shelf because they're not really that well-versed in using it. If they do use it, they maybe don't install it correctly, so all that support burden falls back on the manufacturer, which, of course, they didn't get paid for because they gave the big discount to the distributor because he had a big buy-in. So now you gave him the money in the form of that discount to do all this work in terms of support and after-sales, backup that he's not capable of doing. So now you have to do all the work and he makes all the money. So that whole trying to make tuning and ECUs a commodities-based business, that whole model is broken. And all of the manufacturers that I've talked to are struggling with how to change that. And I know that's a little bit of an offshoot from what we're talking about. But again, they have to believe in you before we're going to let you sell our stuff, because otherwise we have to do all the work. And so you being able to go to them and saying, I've already done it, I've already demonstrated my capabilities, makes that conversation easier.
Yeah, I think that's right on par with what we're talking about. Like whether it be tuning in manufacturers of ECUs or just installing turbos, it's all the same stuff, just calling it a different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. So it doesn't matter if you do wheels and tires or turbos and engines or lift kits. The reality is there a benefit to me being a shop that has some level of certification? Absolutely. On many levels, it gives my consumer more confidence. It makes it easier for me to build manufacturer relations. It makes it easier for me to protect myself and my employees through shop liability insurance. I mean, I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do. I'm not even really excited about getting my shovel and starting to dig, but it is something that would benefit our industry, which is why, we've had these conversations in a non-public setting, and why we're all sitting here publicly talking about it now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, kind of transitioning to the third grouping of people is kind of, or what we consider the third one, is really the engine builder. I built the 350 that's in my Camaro and it's fine, but I'm by no means an engine builder. I have no education on, surface finishes. Gas porting, or I know what a knife edge crank is and I know what the purpose of it is, but I have literally never seen any bit of data to show me that it's any better than just a blunt edge crank, and those are kind of things that, if you could, from an engine builder standpoint, and I think, Kevin and Ben, you guys are probably better at talking about this, but that, as a shop or as a consumer, again, it sure would be cool if there was something that says hey, this guy knows how to build engines, versus right now, that verification is just, how many engines have you heard of this guy blowing up? If it's low, that's good. Right. If it's high, that's bad. And there's no.
I was going to say, I'll add to that for you, because, I was an engine builder before I got into fuel injection stuff, and I've always been more on the engine side of stuff in terms of interest and passion. And of course, you guys know, but not everybody probably knows that I've spent the last 4 to 6 months working hand in hand in a pro stock engine development shop as EFI University, got involved with all the fuel injection change. And so we have our own engine blueprinting program here that we do to address a lot of those issues, Todd, that you were talking about. But even guys like Jed that owns SAM down there in Houston, School of Automotive Machinists, they do a tremendously good job with their curriculum, and they struggle with exactly the same thing we do, which is that I can only guarantee the quality of delivery of my content. I cannot guarantee the level of understanding and acceptance the student's going to take with them. And so, you hear guys all the time go, man, I got this kid that graduated from SAM and he was worthless and blah, blah. That's not necessarily, in my opinion, a good evaluation of what you could get from SAM. Like everything, you get out of it what you put into it. And there's great examples. Kyle Bates from Elite Motorsports graduated from there, and he's one of the sharpest, most intelligent, guys that I've met ever in the engine world. And I've dealt with, guys at the NASCAR level, pro stock, all the way down to grassroots stuff. So I don't think it's fair to say, oh, you graduated from this school, or Ben's EFI University, or, Jed over there at SAM. But the reality is, what guys like he and I are trying to do is give you the most ammunition and set the standard, build the foundation, and give you, Todd, what you talked about, which is the data. So, why is a narrowed connecting rod bearing better than, say, one that's not narrowed? Why would I run a small diameter versus a large diameter? In our classes, well, what is the torque wrench actually used for, and what does it tell me, and why is it not what everybody thinks it is? And so we do live demonstrations and hands-on, and everything we do at my school, and I'm sure Sam is very similar, is backed up with logic and reason, and getting away from our motorsports industry standard of voodoo magic and chicken bones and special recipes that only I get to know. And so I think we need more of that kind of attitude and mentality in developing these curriculums, and less, and I don't mean to tear down UTI, but less the UTI, which is, hey, we get a government subsidy that helps us fund our program that's based on our job placement ability. So they're more focused on how quickly can we get the kids out, get them a job at the local dealership, and then we basically don't hear from them anymore because we got what we wanted. And I think that's a really poor false motivation for the school. that differs from something like what guys like myself and Judd do, where we have a passion for our industry and we want to see the industry grow. And we know the only way you can do that is if we turn out better quality technicians.
Mm-hmm. So moving the conversation on here. So let's say the planets align and we as an industry somehow set a standard for, for tuning, for engine building, and for an actual shop. How do we maintain that standard and who's going to enforce it? Like, do you have any idea? Like, I know, Ben, you mentioned SEMA had already done sort of thing, and I think theirs is largely on the manufacturer side. It's like Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association is, I guess, what the acronym is for. But I know they have shops, like I'm a SEMA member, but it's very hard for me to figure out the benefits of it, other than being able to attend the show, and they do have a couple like group rate things that I can take advantage of. But who is going to enforce the stuff, and how do we maintain it?
Well, from my perspective, again, this is another thing that I've been kicking around for years and pitching it to people and asking for advice. But I honestly think that what we probably would need for something like this to ever happen and come to fruition is almost an industry accepted roundtable of leadership from various manufacturers to put forth some effort, both physically in terms of their time investment and probably a small amount of monetary investment. And we probably need to build an independent entity that does just that looks after setting and sort of enforcing what the standards are and following up and certification and recertification that even my school probably isn't capable of doing, because then it becomes a conflict of interest. Well, I'm selling you the training and I'm the guy doing the certification. Well, I think you need a representative from this company over here and that company over there and almost a board of advisors, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
To set and maintain those standards. The hard part is, rarely does anybody want to volunteer anything, and they certainly don't want to pay and put money into stuff. And so that's the challenge that I found, is how do you build the business model of it? And, it doesn't need to be a for-profit certification company. I'm just saying at some point it has to be administered and maintained and managed as a business. So that's going to require somebody to do. And
that means some money.
And some money, right? There's an administrative cost to doing that. And I really feel like that's why it hasn't truly gotten off the ground so far. But maybe through talking about it more and getting more exposure and getting the idea or the concept out, we might find some people that want to help us with that. I've mentioned Jordan Watson's name a few times over there at National Speed. Mm-hmm. Super intelligent guy. I have a lot of respect for him. I think that he has a lot of visionary expertise for our industry, and I wouldn't mind getting him involved in a conversation like that, because I think there's a guy that could motivate people and get things to happen.
Yeah, and I really think, just looking at it from a far viewpoint, or trying to look at it from really high up, that, SEMA is poised to be a good steward for this. It's a nonprofit, independent in this whole ordeal kind of company that it's in their best interest really to offer this level of certification to the people that are members of their program. And so, and they have a lot of small groups within SEMA. So like they have the young women, I can't remember what the acronym, but so they promote, women in the industry, and they have the Young Executive Network, which is one that I'm part of. They also have like one for getting kids involved, and they have, really they have a whole bunch of spin-offs of groups of people that work in SEMA's favor. And SEMA does have the pull and the monetary resources to back something like this. And so if we can get some industry experts, our friends that have done well in this industry and that have influence as manufacturers and as shop owners and as business people, I do believe that we could at least get some interest out of SEMA to do something like this, so that we don't have to actually develop our own nonprofit corporation to do all this stewarding of the certification.
Okay, so if we approach SEMA to do it now, obviously it makes a lot of sense in my mind to let them do it. So then you have Ben offers the training and the tools to be certified, and then SEMA really only maintains the test and the list of people, or the standard and the list of people that are approved by it. I guess that's similar to how like UTI works with the ASE certification. Like I don't have to go to UTI to be certified. I can go take the ASE certification test as long as I meet their requirements. I think, Todd, we were just looking at it like right before this interview. It's like 2 years of interning or something. And then you take the test, I think is what it was.
Take the test, and that, you just work for some period of 2 years over some period of time, and then you just take the test and you are certified. And I mean, I feel like that's a pretty good requirement, at least for, a knowledge-based certification, just a basic certification and stuff like that. You don't have to really check off any boxes. You just have to prove your competence in the field. And to me, that's good enough. I think for a lot of it, that's going to be enough. And mirroring off of what ASE is and kind of grouping that together with something sort of like the Better Business Bureau, something that there's a database, and there's a middleman, and there's a governing body, and there's a set of standards, and there's a place for consumers to go and air grievances, or there may be a mediary for conflict resolution. These are all really cool possibilities with having some sort of certification program like this.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why I've always been such a big proponent of it, because frankly, we don't get any monetary value out of EFI University doing the certification process. It's actually more of a headache for us than anything. And then there's those people out there that throw rocks at us and say, oh, that's a conflict of interest. I get why you might think that, but we're only doing it because nobody else would. So unless you're willing to step up and do it, then don't blame us for trying to help. So I think if there was a board or a governing body that said, we'll do it, I would be more than happy to EFI University to basically put, as long as the requirements were similar and fair to the standards we have now and not unreasonably onerous. We would just say, we will teach you the training and we'll offer the certification process through XYZ, governing body. It doesn't have to be through us. And I think that would be just fine for the whole industry as well. Just like you said, I don't have to go to UTI to get the ASE certification. I just think that in the high performance and racing industry, we need our version of the ASE.
Yeah, exactly. So we're all pretty much in agreement that this is going to be a good thing. And so like for a path moving forward, like how do we achieve this? And I think the idea has been toyed around with hosting so at the PRI show in December, you can rent rooms and they're actually free to rent, but having a roundtable with manufacturers. So like if we wanted to do a tuner certification roundtable, like inviting all the manufacturers and I guess some specific shops and maybe try to get SEMA or PRI people on board. Does that seem like a logical next step to do this? Ben?
I think that's a great next step, or first step, if you want to call it that. Maybe this discussion is the first step, but the next step, I think, again, if we want industry support and industry input, then we need industry leaders. And so, if any of you guys are out there listening and you happen to work at one of those manufacturers and you think this is interesting, get a hold of us and let us know what your thoughts are and your concerns, and let's put together a conversation and let's make an invite and let's see how many people show up. I mean, between me and Todd and you, Kevin, if it gets to be December and we're sitting around by ourselves in a room with nobody to talk to, then we'll know that nobody cares. But I don't think that'll be the case. I bet you if we keep following this, we can get something done. That's how this works.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it in the podcast I did with Reed. Was myself and Todd put together the Essentials of Operating a Shop class with you, Ben, and we
Yep.
hosted a shortened version of it just to see what kind of interest there was at the PRI show, and we were blown away with the interest. And honestly, we way underestimated it, which was our own fault. But it's just kind of a new thing, and managing shops is so like. Everybody just assumes you have to do it by trial and error, or you just kind of learn it as you go, which is absolutely not the case. Like so much of the stuff that we deal with is like teachable. Like I can teach you to not make mistakes. And I think people realize that. And that's why the class is so popular that, like we're all trying to learn and we're all losing a ton of money because of it, and it does not need to be that way. And so this kind of training to run a shop, like if you know how to do it right and you're making a ton of money on it, you're the kind of guy that can go and take this test and be a certified shop. And for the rest of the people who are struggling to make money and, see a need to learn a class or take a class to learn how to be a certified shop, to be at the level of professionalism where they are making money doing it and can stay in business and be a rock that their customers can lean on when they need help. That's kind of even the perspective from the shop side. And I think you're right on that. When we come to December, if we do this, I feel like there'll be a room full of people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, like we tend to be involved pretty heavily in this industry, and sometimes you think you know something, you can't see the forest for the trees. But I feel like at least here on my end, we have a pretty good finger on the pulse of the industry at the manufacturer level of what their struggles are and what they'd like to see. And so by, again, leveraging those relationships, I think it's at least worth a conversation. I mean, maybe half a dozen or a dozen or 20 different representatives from different companies. And we're not saying we have to get anything done, but we want to get the conversation started to see what the level of interest is. And this is something that would benefit everybody in the industry. It's not a selfish endeavor,
Todd, you had talked to a guy at SEMA who seemed like he was starting to wrangle together a shop organization. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so I've met with one of the directors at SEMA over the years. We've actually bumped into each other quite a few times, and I've always expressed my, I guess you could call it, like frustration of how hard it is to run a shop and trying to get something backing from SEMA for helping doing that. And this was at the same time that we created the Essentials of Operating a Shop class, and he had said they at SEMA are the directors and the presidents and the officers that are there, that they do want to get something for shops because they have a lot of data and they know what their demographic is, but they don't know what to provide those people. And they're trying to figure out what to do. And so the proof of that is, like what's the emissions garage or the rapid prototyping kind of garage that they've got out in California. Like they created that, they spent a ton of money putting that facility together because manufacturers were asking for it. And they just recently this week, released data or released the ability for shops to look up demographic data on automobiles to gauge interest in, either manufacturing products or opening shops or, developing stuff for specific types of cars in your area. And then they also have the, what's the product one, the database?
SEMA
the SEMA
Co-op.
Data Co-op. So they've got the SEMA Data Co-op as well, where they're trying to unify how manufacturers label their parts with what they call ACEs and PIEs system. So SEMA is putting money and effort and power and people behind these ideas of improving just the industry as a whole. And, I approached him trying to improve shop owners specifically because an installing shop is such a weird business. It's a service business, but you're an expert but you're kind of really an expert just in your field. And, you have to deal with customers in a really weird sense that I don't see in a lot of other professional businesses. And we always complain about it in several Facebook groups of, the customer coming and haggling for a price of an install, and they just paid, they paid $5,000 for a turbo kit and they have $4,000 wheels and tires, and they don't want to pay you $100 to put a fuel pump in, and you don't see that with a lot of other professional industries. You'd get laughed at if you did that at your dentist, or you go to a restaurant and you ask them for a discount because you're a nice guy, or you're going to put their steakhouse sticker on your car or something like that. So yeah, I really do think that SEMA wants to help with this. They really just don't know what the industry needs. They are very distant from the industry being, a nonprofit organization that the size that they are. And so, their main purpose in existence is to have the convention, the SEMA convention. Like that is why they exist. But they have the ability to do things such as actually having lobbyists in DC lobbying against that clean air sentence that was added in there, kind of stuff for the EPA. So they do want to see the industry do better. And I think we will be able to get a positive, outreach from them. And so I guess, I kind of can request of our listeners that if you know any SEMA representatives, just kind of maybe kind of get the idea or ask them about if they'd be interested in, developing some sort of certification process for performance shop owners, or really just aftermarket installers or manufacturers in general, to have some way to connect everybody together to, the whole goal of this is to make it easier to do these things, make it easier to find customers and justify prices and tell people how good you are at what you're doing. So I really just think that they'll be able to help, and we're just going to need the support of the community to make that process hopefully a little bit easier if we decide to move forward with it.
Well, and just a sort of a shameless plug, for that kind of thing, a lot of what happens at SEMA is a political animal, and so having good representation helps us. So I don't know how many of you guys know Chris Douglas out there. He works at Competition Cams, but he's actually running for the SEMA board of directors. He's a candidate for the 2016. And so, if you're the kind of guy that's going to go out and vote for something like that, he's a really great representative of our industry, motorsports, fuel injection. He's the kind of guy that you could go to and bend his ear. And so I was thinking I'll probably reach out and invite him to our conversation at the PRI show. But the more people we get involved that are game changers like that, the better off we're going to be.
Awesome. That's a good idea. So I guess we can kind of close this thing off. We're running right about an hour, which is typically normal. So I think we've got a pretty good groundwork of what we're looking to do. So, we've kind of laid out that, like tuning, engine building, installing, and shops kind of all need some kind of standards to meet. And we kind of have an idea that, to set these standards, we need to go to the manufacturers and talk to other shops to kind of get an idea of what, and even insurance companies, of what is required of us to meet these standards. So do you need to have a business license? Do you need to have insurance? Do you need to have your name on all the suppliers' insurance? That kind of standard is, I think, fairly easy to get some of it set in stone. And then from there, it's just kind of, what other people think. And why don't we go ahead and have our listeners, if you're involved in this community, if you're a manufacturer, get in touch with us. We have the Do It for a Living community Facebook page, but you can also just email any of us, any of the three of us, and let us know who you are and how you can help, and we can kind of get this ball rolling. And I know Todd we've already done this once before, but we will go ahead and move forward with reserving a room at the PRI show, and we can try to get people involved and get people there to. And I'm sure we can get SEMA there as well to talk about this further.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of move forward with maybe having, it'll be kind of a roundtable. Well, probably more of a panel discussion. I was kind of how I envision it, where you have a moderator and you have some influencers, and then you have a crowd of people that can ask questions if they want, or they can listen and provide value, and we can use that to kind of gauge the industry, the heartbeat of the industry, of how much this is needed, or if anybody has any other ideas. I'm all open for hearing what other people want or need or think that would make this better.
Is there anything else you wanted to say before we close out, Ben?
Oh gosh, if you're not careful, I'll talk for another hour. So I think we got the idea across of what we want to try to accomplish, and now we can at least see what the reaction is and get a temperature for whether anyone other than us is interested, and then we'll go forward from there. But I'm excited for the listeners to sort of chime in and let us know what you guys think out there.
Awesome.
Yeah, and even if you're a customer of a shop and you're part of the Do It for a Living Facebook page, we would like to know, if this would provide value for you. And I know it's easy to say, yeah, I would definitely provide value, but, just something, you don't have to share a bad experience you've had, but really just what do you think we could do to make you feel better about taking your, pride and joy vehicle to a shop and dropping it off to have them do a whole bunch of work to it. So love to hear some feedback from the listeners, even if you're not a shop owner, even if you're just a consumer, we'd love to hear from you.
All right, so Ben, thank you very much for your giving us an hour of your time today. I know this has been kind of a short notice podcast, so thanks again. And Todd, thanks for your time as well.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Do It for a Living. You can find out more about this guest, this show, and even details about what we just talked about at our website, doitforaliving.net. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/doitforaliving and tell us who you want to hear from. And most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Click subscribe. Do it now. Seriously. I'll wait while you grab your phone.